Hello and welcome to the Unnamed Automotive Podcast. My name is Sami Haj Assad, and with me, as always, is my good friend and fellow automotive journalist, Benjamin Hunting. Say hi to the people, Ben.
You know, Sami and I have been talking for a full hour prior to actually starting the podcast today, which I think might be a record.
I'm not sure it's a record, but it is up there. We do a preamble before
56 minutes.
any show to ensure that we're I think a lot of people say that we have good chemistry, and I think it's because we've already gotten all the bad chemistry out before the podcast.
This is a fully scripted show. I mean, don't let it fool you. A lot of that hour was rehearsing a script that we've spent even more time writing.
Yeah, right. There wouldn't be as many or is that just my illiteracy coming through?
Yeah, it would be better if you were better at reading, but I understand you. There are limitations to
and
everyone.
Concentration.
Yeah.
And then that wouldn't explain how every time I have to talk about a car that I've reviewed, that I suddenly have no information about it.
It's almost like you didn't drive it.
No, it's because I always have this document full of all my notes, and then as soon as we start the podcast, I'm like, okay, I gotta get focused, and I close all my windows, and I'm like, oh shoot, I
thought those notes were written in crayon.
I think I'm going to start doing that.
Because then you can't close that window.
Thanks, Chief. But then I'll probably end up like folding it or tearing it.
Oh no, the dreaded fold that renders all things illegible.
All right, that's the voice of my friend and fellow automotive journalist Benjamin Hunting.
Maybe you're getting an idea of why we spent a full hour talking before the podcast to get this out of our system.
Ben, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find your latest work?
Sure, you can find my work at Motor Trend, at Capital One, and at Haggerty.
And you can find my work at autotrader.ca, driving.ca, and Electric Autonomy Canada.
Totally real outlet.
It is a very real outlet. I actually really enjoy reading and writing at Electric Autonomy, and that's not just because they pay me to write for them. It's got some interesting stuff.
Okay.
They interviewed a UPS driver whose truck is now electric.
Just like that, he woke up and boom.
Yeah.
That's an interesting story. I would read that story.
See? That's what I think is a good story. Obviously, we've been doing this for a while, and my tastes have changed significantly since I started.
Yeah, it's like back in the day, Sammy's like, oh, let's talk about the Lamborghini I'm driving. Now he's like, I'm really excited by this electric UPS truck. Sammy's also a father now. Maybe that's...
Haven't you noticed? Maybe you don't notice, but I can hear my Amazon delivery guys coming from like a mile away with their
my Amazon
Sprinter.
delivery guys, they don't use Sprint. Well, sometimes it's a Sprinter, sometimes it's an NV200. Mm-hmm. I see a lot of those.
That's cool.
I have a gravel road in front of my house, so
okay.
I can hear them, but mostly what I hear is the door slamming.
Yeah.
Because it's very, very quiet where I live now, and it's so different from obviously when I was living in the city. But like something as subtle as someone closing the door of their car, that's my signal that someone's in the house. There's about to be a home invasion or a delivery.
When you turn on all the lights.
Or a delivery. Yeah, I hit all the lights to make it easier for them to find me.
No, they have to know that somebody's home.
That's my game.
I thought out in rural like communities, they are like casing the joints for nobody being there, so there's no resistance.
Sammy, do you think that my delivery driver comes at like 11 o'clock at night?
Yeah, sometimes. Man, have you actually gotten an option? Amazon will be like, we'll deliver it overnight between 4 and 8 a.m. It's the craziest thing.
You have that option?
Yeah.
I've never seen that. The latest that goes is it's usually Intelcom that does the deliveries out here. They're like a subcontractor for Amazon in Quebec. And I'll get like, we'll arrive before 10 p.m. And I'm like, okay, that's pretty late, but that's the latest I think I've seen.
Have they ever came like 9:59?
No, usually it's like 8 o'clock or legitimately where I live, which you've been to, they're not coming out here at 10 p.m. Like it's not on the way home. Or
where is that warehouse? They're picking stuff up.
Yeah, you're definitely extending your shift if you're coming out here at 10 p.m.
Dang.
Maybe you sleep in the van. If you're a delivery driver and you're listening, I would love to know like what your personal cutoff is for delivering something remote. Like I'm sure that in your own personal decision is like, I'm not going out there. They can get it tomorrow. It's not that urgent.
We don't typically talk about delivery vehicles.
No.
What we usually do is talk about one of the cars that we've been driving recently. And Ben, you have a pretty cool car that's worth talking about, I think, at least in some detail, because I find it interesting and I want to hear your thoughts on it. Hit me with it. What have you been driving again?
A 2024 Subaru BRZ TS.
And the TS stands for
tuned by STI, which is not something you would ever think that's what that stands for, because you think that maybe you would just put STI on the car. Like everyone knows what that is, right?
I think they're forgetting.
So we're going to remind them with instead of using 3 letters, we're going to use 2 letters. I guess it is more affordable.
Use 2 out of the 3 letters and in a different order than usual.
It does say STI on the gauge cluster. Which is
thank good. Well, so do you think you've got a defect when you? Do you think it's a defect when you turn the car on? You're like, no, I had the DS. Not
I don't know.
STI.
It's there all the time. It moves around, but it's there all the time.
What do you mean it moves around? It's not a Pokemon. You have to catch it.
No, but depending on like what mode you have the screen in, kind of, you can see STI in different places. From what I remember.
We haven't had the second gen Toyobaru twins on the podcast frequently, have we? Not really.
I don't remember the last time we talked about the BRZ.
That's fair. If you want to talk specifically to the BRZ, it's worth pointing out, of course, that these 2 cars. This car is built alongside the Toyota GR86.
It's also worth pointing out that Sami owns a BRZ.
I own a Scion FRS. I own the dead brand version of this car. Orphaned brand version of this car. What would you call it? Orphaned? Dead?
I think dead. We're going to go with dead. R.I.P.
Oh. But Scion had so many cool ideas.
We're not going to get into it.
Last one was the FRS. But don't you remember the CDs?
The last time we drove a BRZ was in 2020. That's a really long time to not have a car on the podcast.
Was that so that means it wasn't a second gen either?
I don't think so.
So I remember driving a pre-production version of the second gen twin. It was the Toyota at that point, the GR86, and I came away pretty impressed with it because it had more power than the first generation model, and it felt a little bit more refined in all of the key areas. But I think you drove it.
That was 2022 when you drove it.
Yeah, and then I think you drove it and were you channeled your inner Reddit poster and said, I can't believe this doesn't have a turbo. They've been sitting on this car forever. Everybody wants it to have a turbo. Why doesn't it have a turbo?
So what's funny is about what you're remembering is I actually drove it first, according to our various podcast history. I drove it like a month before you did. You know why I drove it before you did? Because you were in Monaco on a yacht watching the Grand Prix.
I was that's impossible. I had an embargo for this thing.
No, it was the same episode where we talked about both the BRZ second generation, GR86, and then your Monaco adventure. So it's been 2 years since we've talked about the Toyobaru twins, but it's been 4 years since we talked about specifically the Subaru model.
Yeah.
So let's get back to what tuned by STI actually means.
What are they tuning?
Not a lot. It's surprisingly restrained how they've approached the car. There is some suspension tweaks, not many, but just to kind of differentiate it from the standard version. You get bigger Brembo brakes, and you get some unique styling stuff. It's mostly badging, and I think stripes on the seats, from what I remember. And you get different tires. Let me look out specifically. I think they're PS4s. But don't quote me on that until I confirm it. But yeah, if all of that sounds like not a whole lot of, it is PS4s, summer performance tires. So those are the main things you're getting from the car. Some suspension tweaks, high performance Brembo brakes, and 18-inch wheels with the PS4s. And the rest of it is pretty much a few restrained styling additions. That's not a lot, man, for a special model car.
No,
especially for Subaru, which is a company that offered, not anymore, but offered an STI version of the Impreza, of the WRX, that really did make a lot of changes and created a fundamentally different driving experience.
So, I mean, does it make any different driving experience to you?
I haven't driven the base model BRZ, and I know that, you did drive the the GR86, but Toyota and Subaru have gone back and forth quite a bit, saying that their engineers each created unique driving characteristics and dynamics for the various models so that they would feel different from behind the wheel. I've never driven them back to back. Sammy, have you?
No, not since the first generation one.
So I can't really confirm whether that's marketing or whether that's real. I will say that this car felt bouncier than I expected over rough pavement, in the sense that it's perhaps possible that the shock tuning is more aggressive, somewhat more aggressive. Not a lot. I'm not saying like it was a kidney shattering ride or anything like that. It was
right.
Fine, but it is different than what I expected. Aside from that, though, I'm not in a situation. I have a pretty cool drive route that I've discovered since I moved out to the country that has a mountain road and a valley road kind of thing going together.
Okay.
And I do get the chance to go up and down hills at various rates of speed. But for braking, I'm never really in a situation where I would be replicating track braking. And from what I understand, the Brembos that are installed on the TS are more for preventing fade in a track situation versus really giving you an extra bite on the street or on the track.
Interesting. Okay.
I'm not able to determine on the street whether that's a worthwhile upgrade. As for the suspension, as I mentioned, it didn't feel all that different. And what's the last thing? The tires. I mean, yeah, you're going to get more grip out of a set of PS4s. There's no question about that.
But is that really worth a price upgrade from a base version of this car?
Well, the other thing too is they're quite loud as tires, or at least the BRZ is not insulated enough compared to like, a luxury car that you would normally see those kinds of tires on, or a more expensive car.
Yeah.
And I really got a lot of noise in the cabin. Even just cruising on the highway, this is a very noisy car.
Yeah, I'll tell you from my experience with the first gen FRS, quietness is not a characteristic that is ever used in any form of this vehicle. There's no element there.
And it's you asked about the price upgrade. So a base BRZ in the US is $30,000. A TS is $35,000.
So talk to me about what that means. I mean, is $5,000
$38,000 in Canada? Sorry, Sammy. In Canada, the difference is it's actually a base BRZ is $34,000 and a TS is $38,700, so $39,000. So it's $5,000 Canadian difference, but that's really only like $3,500 US. So the Canadian car is a much better deal, which is surprising to me.
I'm curious as to what it's like to because I think, we've seen these cars for a while now, and I think they have a lot of enthusiast fans who are comfortable with making changes to their vehicles that are in line to what are offered on this TS. I think you will see people who will get maybe not a tuned suspension, but like coilovers or something, lower the ride height a little bit.
Coilovers is a pretty I'll let you finish, but I do have ideas about what you're saying.
Sure. And then of course tires and wheels and brakes are a common I would call them modification for these cars. I would actually imagine that if you're getting all of that stuff done at once, $5,000 is just in line of how much you'd spend at a reputable shop with reputable parts, right?
It might be, and kind of in line with what you're saying. I agree with what you're putting out there, in that these are the most common mods you would make for a car like this.
Yeah,
but there's a couple differences. I think when you're looking at a TS, you don't get to choose that suspension tune. Right?
That's fair. There's no like wrench like a Polestar.
Yeah, there's no ride height adjustment or anything like that. So you're locked into what Subaru's engineers feel is the best for your situation. That is not great. If you're a hardcore customizer or you are going on the track, you probably want more control over spring rate and suspension damping and coilover ride height. So that's not amazing. The tires, you can get tires of any kind. I mean,
you can get more aggressive tires. You can get slippier tires. You can get winter tires like I got. Like, you can do whatever you want.
I think that what I'm saying is there's nothing about this package you couldn't replicate yourself. There's nothing about this package that really comes across as something that only the factory could have done. Mm-hmm. Like when you look at the WRX STI, you got that different center differential which
Yes.
was driver
Which is
controlled,
exclusive, right?
different engine in a lot of cases, a lot of generations. It was a different motor. So these are things that like you can't easily replicate if you could replicate it all on your own, and it made sense to kind of go up to that version of the car. But with the
WRX STI is no longer a staple of Subaru today.
no, it's
right?
not. It's not out there. But just to kind of touch on the history of STI with Subaru, it really feels like with the BRZ, it's been diluted, and I'm not sure why you would mention STI with this car and offer a diluted version. I mean, why not just call it the TS and have it be its own thing?
That's fair, yeah.
Like, you know how Mazda with the Miata, you can get, what is it, the Club Sport or the Club or whatever, and it's the version that doesn't necessarily have all the power accessories, but it does have a locking differential, and it does have like the better tires and that kind of thing.
Okay,
they don't. It's not a Mazda speed, I guess is what I'm saying. It's just,
but there hasn't been a Mazda speed in a long time, too,
sure,
right?
but it's just a trim level, you know? And I think that with the BRZ, they're kind of trying to have it both ways. Oh, we have this STI heritage, even though we don't have any other products in the lineup now. This is the only STI.
We don't have a single STI branded product.
Exactly.
And the ones that you remember with more power and all
are
that
nothing
jazz
like this.
Are nothing like this. Yeah, this is nothing like that.
So this is where you and I are going to have a disagreement of opinion. Because before I talk about how the car drove and all this stuff, I truly think that an STI version of this vehicle with a turbocharged engine is a good idea. And I think the only reason we don't see it is because Toyota has pressured Subaru to protect the Supra.
I don't know about that, but there is a part of me that believes that adding more power would increase the price in a significant way, and then take away one of the key factors of this vehicle and move it from the entry-level sports car into a whole different category of vehicle that it wouldn't be able to compete properly in.
I have a rebuttal to that.
Sure, yeah, of course.
So
no, like just to do you want to talk our listeners through what that means, like why that's the case?
Well, for me, the way I look at it is when this car initially came out, I did not think it needed more power.
It was so much fun. I mean, that was the case.
Yeah,
right?
the first gen car, I never drove it and thought, oh man, this would be better if it had 100 more horsepower. No, it was a lot of fun to drive. Nowadays, the landscape has changed a little bit in terms and the pricing on the vehicle has changed a little bit as well. And
I think I want to talk about this too, because I think you used to be able to get a BRZ for about 25 grand when it first came out. And now you've added $5,000 to that price point.
And you start to look around at what else you can buy for that money. And you're looking at cars like the Elantra N. You're looking at the GTI. You're looking at, I mean, obviously these are not, rear wheel drive, lightweight performance cars, but they are performance cars. You're looking at like a Mustang EcoBoost.
Once you pass that $30,000 mark, which this car has now done by a long shot, you start to change the metric, right?
And let's get up to the TS, which is 35,000. We were just talking, you were saying, oh, this, if we put a turbo into this car,
this will be a $50,000 car.
Well, I don't know if it would be a $50,000 car, but it would definitely be more expensive. But you said it wouldn't necessarily be able to compete with cars at that price point because other aspects of the car would lag behind. I think that's what your concern is. But if you go, how much does the 400Z cost? The Nissan Z right now, isn't it 40,000?
Yeah, and that's considered a bargain, right?
So if you're buying a BRZ TS and for $5,000 more, you can get 400 horsepower in a very similar package. You lose the rear seat, but you gain a slightly larger car with the same concept. It's not as light and it's more powerful. So it's like kind of walking between muscle car and sports car.
I love this conversation because it talks about what we found was weird about the Z when it first came out, is that it was like, oh, it's not quite up to the level of, let's say, the Supra in terms of edginess, but it's not up to the Mustang in terms of straight line performance.
And now it is.
And then now you're talking about how it, like, the Z actually does have a competitor when you're talking about just around that $40,000 mark. It's a better purchase than a $35,000 BRZ. I'll agree with you on that.
And if you start, the other thing too is if you look at the price of the Supra, I mean, for Nissan Z Money, you get the 4-cylinder Supra.
Yeah.
You don't get anything approaching. Oh, sorry, the Z is up to 43 now. So that's a bit more of a gap. But
yeah, these things keep getting more expensive every time we turn
I
around.
wanted to double check on that because inflation is, slowly squeezing the life out of all of us.
But the issue with these vehicles is like, I think they all carry a certain like badge, like they have like a niche that really hits. They focus on that niche. I mean, the Miata was the lightweight sports car champ, right?
And it still is. It's 500 pounds,
is.
almost 500 pounds less on the scale compared to the BRZ. So
but the BRZ is able to do that without the compromise of a. I would say there's a bit of a daily driver compromise to a convertible too.
Sure,
right?
but you can get the RF if you want. Like if that's really what you're into.
Yeah.
But like what I'm saying, I guess I'm saying sort of the same thing you are in the sense that they focus on the niche, but I don't think that the Miata niche is the BRZ niche. And I think that each of those cars now occupies a niche of one. I don't think there are any direct competitors to either of those cars, which means you start to look at indirect competitors, which is where I think the idea of a turbocharged STI version of this car is interesting. And to address your concerns about pricing, I look at a car like the Honda Civic, where you can get an SI for like, I think around 30. Is that the pricing of it now?
I believe so. I'm going to be driving one real soon, Ben.
And you can get a Type R, which is like, what, 50?
Yeah.
Is it 50 or is it like 47?
44 is what it starts at. 45.
Okay, 45. So that's a large gap. That's $15,000. It's the same car. It's the same platform interpreted very differently. Now, why not have... I don't think the existence of the Type R makes the SI irrelevant or takes away from what the SI is. And I think the same thing could be said if you had an STI version of the BRZ that was maybe 400 horsepower or not even 300 horsepower.
Yeah, I think
330 horsepower. You can still have the entry level pure, quote unquote, pure driving naturally aspirated version of the car and have an STI. And I think there's room for both of those. And then all of a sudden you have a competitor to the Z, which, I mean, no one's really buying the Z in large quantities, but you also have a competitor to the Supra, which I think is the bigger problem because I think with 330 horsepower on a track, the BRZ and the GR86 would outperform a Supra.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's possible. I mean, the Supra isn't as, I mean, let's imagine how much more weight would it add to the vehicle to add a turbo and then maybe the associated brakes and that you should probably upgrade as well when you're adding more power, right?
Yeah.
10% more power? I mean, weight maybe?
10% more. You'd say it would be 10% heavier, so 300 pounds heavier?
Something like that. Which would put it at what, around 3,000 pounds?
Well, it's at 28 something now, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe 3,000 pounds. And what does a Corvette weigh these days? Like 32?
Wow. Okay.
Something like that.
That's impressive if it does. That's
well, I mean,
cool.
the Corvette's all exotic and expensive now, right? So they can use materials and keep the weight down. You're not going to see that in the BRZ. But
and then my main concern is like, I think there's other elements of the price. Like the Type R, I think is kind of like, isn't it kind of exclusive? Isn't there used to be a limited number of them, I used to think. Well, I guess maybe that's not the case anymore.
I don't know. I don't remember.
And I mean, they were hard to get. Increase the price as well. So,
but they were hard to get because of dealer markup. I mean,
oh yeah, and they probably still are.
But here's the other question, Sammy.
But you want to? No. We want to need to focus on this. Would it be better than a Supra if it had a turbo? And I think.
Better in certain situations. I'm saying.
What would that situation?
I'm saying on a racetrack, I think a turbocharged BRZ that was well done from the factory, because I'm on the track with a lot of forced induction BRZs. They are very common now, but not everyone likes the platform.
Really?
They have aero issues, I think, at very high rates of speed that you have to deal with to keep it sticky. And I think that that's something that Subaru would probably be able to do very well on their own. But all I'm saying is I think like on a track, the lighter, high horsepower BRZ would probably outperform a Supra.
Okay.
And I think that is a problem of perception for Toyota, and Toyota just doesn't want that to happen. And so they've but said to Subaru, we're not going to be doing that.
They've strong-armed them a little bit.
Yeah.
I think there's also the element though, but that would allow Toyota to focus on certain aspects of the Supra and make it more of a premium vehicle. I mean, remember it's a shared platform with a BMW.
But
and
they can't go too premium because what's the competitor for them at that point? Porsche?
yeah, yeah, I suppose
That's a
so.
problem.
But I think 718s are silly expensive now.
Sure, but like you're never going to touch that performance. You just aren't. Not in a front engine.
You don't think so?
Not
Not
in a
anymore.
front rear car.
I think they're pulling it off. I think people are getting closer and closer every year.
But not the Supra.
$72,000 the base Cayman.
Yeah. But
with 300 horsepower.
the other issue is like badge
I
recognition.
mean, this is also a conversation about whether or not power is. I mean, if a Cayman has 300 horsepower and costs 72 grand, like maybe power is not what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, but
Performance
300
what we're
horsepower
talking
is still considerably more horsepower than a BRC has.
about. Yeah, which I think is what
228, I think.
220. I mean, 220 or 230. Yeah.
So, and also don't forget that the torque from that engine is going to be very different it's going to be a very different driving experience. You're going to go from a high revving engine to a low end engine. It's just going to be different all around, but different isn't necessarily bad. And that leads me to my next point. The BRZ has not really changed from what it was when it first came out. And is that a problem?
I think that's the problem. I think that's my biggest concern about what they've got going on. And it feels like evolution isn't in the future of these vehicles.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. It feels like they have a template, they're modernizing the template just enough, and they have addressed concerns. I mean, the current car has more torque than the previous generation, doesn't necessarily have the flat spot that the other car had in the power band, and it is marginally more comfortable.
Yeah, nicer inside. It has more tech too, at least, right? Like, I think it's got a nice infotainment.
Yeah, it's like
system on that
adaptive
chassis.
cruise and that kind of thing.
But I mean, if you compare this to other vehicles, and if you want to talk specifically sports cars in the industry, evolution is a thing that's been happening pretty impressively. I mean, the Mustang we talked about recently, Mustangs used to just be kind of like muscly, just straight line performance vehicles. And now you get performance packs that give them way better grip. You've got these dark horse models that can corner unbelievably well, or even Shelby's like the GT350s that can keep up with some of these, German performance cars, I think. That's insane. That's a real evolution.
And
right?
part of that is because Ford has made the Mustang the do everything car, right? Because it's their only car. So they've given it that broad portfolio. They made it the 911 of the Ford lineup, where like there's so many different variants.
Okay.
I mean, it's not as extreme as the 911, but it's the same kind of concept. Like Porsche is willing to sell you the 911 that fits your needs. And
yes,
it can be a convertible, it can be all-wheel drive, it can be a comfy GTS. And Ford is almost in the same position where they're like, well, do you want the premium car? Do you want the stripped down car? Do you want the track version of the car? Or do you want the mid-engine version of the car from a racing program? It's getting wide. It's like when there was all that talk about, are they going to take the Corvette and make an SUV out of it because there's so much name recognition? Well, Ford actually did that. They took the Mustang and they made an SUV. So they've got a lot invested in the Mustang as a concept, I think.
So, I mean, this is the main thing we're talking about is that, like, is there any interest in taking a vehicle and evolving it, right? And what do you think? Like, I truly do think we've seen evolution in the automotive industry, in performance vehicles in particular. Things are punching above their weight class, above their price point, and cars are doing really cool things that we never thought that they could. I mean, do you not remember the first time we drove the Elantra N, for example, and suddenly believed, like, front-wheel drive performance cars can be really, really fun?
Well, the problem is once the BRZ punches above its weight, it's punching at the Supra. And Toyota just probably doesn't want that to happen. And the other thing to consider, evolving something like the BRZ and the GR86, there's only so much money there. It's entirely possible that they've already reached the market cap for these vehicles. And the Supra is the same thing. The Supra is not a high-selling vehicle. So all of these vehicles have a certain limit on how many buyers there are for this class of vehicle. I think that if you added the turbo for the STI, you introduce a new class of buyer who would be interested and potentially expand the market. But again, that expansion will likely come at the cost of losing buyers for the Supra. But I don't really see a path forward for this car that makes that will radically change it unless they decide to go the muscular route, because it's just not been on that trajectory. And at this point, I would like to talk about the fact that we are lucky to have this car. Mm-hmm. It drives very well. It is a lot of fun. It's not the most fun you can have in a car. It's not the revelation, I think, that the first generation car was when the first generation car came out, when the idea of these really competent sport compact cars was just kind of in its infancy.
Right.
And we didn't really have, there was no Type R, there was no, the Elantra N wasn't around, things
That's
like
right,
that.
yeah.
WRX.
It was such a different landscape, right?
Yeah. And I think that when we're talking about how this car hasn't really changed, despite the landscape having changed, it throws that into even starker relief, and we notice it more. But that being said, this is a fun car. It is an enjoyable car to drive. You are actually driving it. You don't feel like you're being managed by a whole bunch of electronic systems, traction controls, and all that kind of stuff, because it doesn't really have enough power to get you in trouble that way, unless you specifically choose to put yourself in trouble. And I appreciate the honesty of the car and the fact that a company is willing to make this vehicle, even knowing there are limits on how many people want to buy it.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. But the main thing to discuss, though, of course, is that the buyers have all bought their car, right? They want the next step, the next generation. And I think that will only occur with an STI or turbocharged version of the vehicle. And you need to deliver. You need to do that.
And what would
or else these, like, what will a board BRZ upgrade be, right? If I have a BRZ, I'm now in the market for something with more power or that's more fun, I'm suddenly leaving the Subaru brand, right?
Yeah, for sure. And then, we've been talking so much about what would Subaru do, but like, if Subaru comes out with their STI version, what does the GR86 do? Mm-hmm. What is that going to be called? It's already the GR. It's already the Gazoo
GR86 GR. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's an even worse position if they have to worry about the Supra, because it's in the same.
Just stick a TRD badge on it and be done with it.
I guess you're
right. That would be weird.
GR86 TRD, and it's more. It's better than the Supra, which is sitting beside it in the showroom. I mean, that
should be the badge, of course.
There's always the possibility too that Toyota just does nothing and cedes that to Toyota to Subaru and lets them go ahead with it. But I mean, does Subaru have the cash to do this kind of thing? Is that their priority? Is it going to move the needle in sales in a meaningful way? These are all things we don't know.
That's fair. But we also don't know if they care, right? Like, we don't know if they actually think that this, as you mentioned, it's a very small market. Subaru seems to really be impressed with the buyers of their SUVs and their wilderness models. They seem to think that's what people
so you're saying
BRZ, want from their badge.
Instead of
Wilderness?
BRZ TS, it's BRZ WS? Wilderness?
Actually, I've heard that Ford is apparently considering some sort of off-road version of the Mustang, and they already have a rally version of the Mach-E.
Oh yeah,
is this the new thing? It's like a Safari, like the Porsche Safari and Lamborghini Sterrato.
I definitely want to see the small 4-cylinder high revving engine in the BRZ turning some really big tires. that is, I think,
that's how we'll get the turbo.
That's the next frontier for this car.
Can you imagine? That's the only way it'll get a turbo.
It would look something like a rally fighter, I think.
I know. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
We can dream. And we will.
I assure you, when I dream, I do not dream about that.
Okay, fine. I don't want to know what you dream of yet.
That wasn't what I was trying to say. I was trying to say that I don't dream about I'm not into that craze. I don't understand the Safari craze. Like,
it's got novelty.
It does. Yes, but the thing with novelty, Sammy, is once you've done it repeatedly, it's no longer novel and it becomes a trend. And it's like, remember when crossovers were a novelty? Like, this is how you get the industry today.
How you get saturation.
Yeah, everything is like 5 years from now, everything is Safari. All we're driving is Safari.
I can't wait for it.
So if you want to send us in your dreams, weird stuff that's happened to you, weird thoughts, or maybe ideas for a Safari car that you think should be built. Sammy, how can people do that? How can they get in touch and share their thoughts?
I think the easiest way is to head on over to our website, unnamedautomotivepodcast.com. Once you're there, there's a contact us button. You press that, you fill it out, and all of that lands in our inbox, whatever your message is. Additionally, you can email us the old-fashioned way. The email address is benjamin@benjaminhunting.com. Or you can reach out to us on social media, specifically Instagram. That's where we tend to respond to messages and requests for messages.
And if we're a little slow to respond, it's because sometimes Instagram takes messages from people that we don't follow or that we don't know and puts them into a folder that it hides from us. And you have to manually check that folder. And then actually there's two folders.
It's a subfolder within a folder.
Yeah. And so sometimes it can take a little while for us to see our messages. We're sorry about that.
So you can reach Ben. He's at Hunting Benjamin. Or you can reach me. I'm at Sammy_ha, like you're laughing.
And if you would like to help us out, rate, review, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. People repeat that because it actually does work. All of those three things will help.
Or just share it. Just share it.
Tell your friends
with your buddies.
You heard some people arguing about a BRZ STI. And if they're into that, then they're the kind of people who should be listening to this podcast.
That's right. Yeah, I appreciate that.
And we only have one vehicle this week because Sammy is actually taking off tomorrow morning on a trip. We're doing a kind of an unexpected quick podcast today. Sammy, what are you going to be driving? What's secret thing? I think you talked about it a little bit last week, but the timing was off. So you're going to be driving some secret stuff, and we're going to talk about it next week, right?
Yeah, that's right. I've got the Honda Civic Hatchback Hybrid and the Civic Si, the 2025 model year versions of this vehicle, of these vehicles, and I'm really eager to talk to you about them next week.
I'm going to be talking about something that's very similar to the Civic Si, as I've discovered, and that's the 2025 Mini Cooper S, which is the redesigned Cooper. I believe the horsepower is roughly similar to what you get out of the Si, and they're both hatchbacks. I think they're both hatchbacks.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I'm curious to compare our feelings on these two cars next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.